1. I've just left this workplace a week ago, so I feel safe now being able to share this story that happened last month. I've worked in a tourist trap that's smack dab in the middle of the entertainment capital, so we specialized in celebrity figures, made to their exact measurements. Our tickets aren't cheap, and the only discount we offered was for military. My job is to cater to customers in varying positions. And that day I was at the front in order to sell and assist with tickets. Cue this guy coming through with my usual customer service persona. I asked him how I can help him. He asked if we do military discounts, and I happily said yes, and directed him to the counter where I can process payment. All the while it's CBT, I misheard EBT counts, and I just said yes because he mentioned military earlier. And print his ticket. All I told him after that is I just need to see his military ID. While he was fishing his ID out of his wallet, he just told me, "You know what you should say? Thank you for your service, right?" This just took me off guard that my coworker scanning tickets noticed me freeze and tried to come over to ask if I needed help, and I just gave him the thumbs up. I blurted that I have mixed feelings, especially since I'm not a US native, but because I wasn't a native, I respected the hard work, no matter a person's position and or job. I couldn't think of any country that's better than I'd rather be. Attempting to salvage the awkwardness, and he seemed okay with my response, but still carried an uppity, self-important attitude, and showed me his ID. I already had the tickets on the checkout cart and pulled out the card machine, as I did notify him ahead of time we don't accept cash. And not long after, the tickets printed, which I hurriedly gave to him, and he didn't even try to give it to my coworker to scan it and just brushed past him. I called him and said I just need to scan them quickly, as he was already walking his way up. But then he blurted out at my coworker, "At least someone's willing to do their job." And I just gave him the fakest laugh. I felt bad for my coworker after he asked, "What did he say?" And I just told him not to mind him, to which he revealed to me that there was a way to reprint the last tickets, and I just felt worse, but he told me to cheer up. I had great coworkers. After my encounter with that guy, I can't help but mull because my coworker didn't deserve to be shit-talked literally behind his back, and I just wanted to keep him moving because he was trying to deal with the short interaction we had. The thing that I pulled over was his ID. I never saw a military ID like his before, wherein it had a paragraph written next to his picture, but it doesn't show what rank, base, or unit he's in, because I've served people who had military IDs in the past. There were a few. First time was a woman with her family, sister, mother, and grandma, and she was pretty sweet. She joked at first that because she's the only one with the ID, she might be the only one with the discount, as she was talking to her family too. But she looked genuinely surprised when I printed all their tickets with the discount, and her sister seemed the most excited, and they all just thanked me and moved on, as I told them to enjoy themselves after thanking them for purchasing. Her ID showed she was a sergeant. I can't remember if it was a 6 or 7 next to a letter, but as far as I remember it was high, in the Air Force. The second time were a couple of young-looking guys who honestly could pass as twins, with the way they were casually dressed and looked intimidating at first, because they were just quiet, but they probably noticed my voice crack as they asked if we have a certain celebrity in here, until his other friends saw our figure behind the red stench and began fangirling like a teen boy, and both began just laughing and joking as they became more excited and were very polite. One of them had the rank of private first class, and the other was a lance corporal, both in the Marines. I guess it best explains their physique. Putting gym bros to shame. None of them, but for that guy, has ever asked or told me to thank them for their service, and honestly, I don't know shit about military. What more their ranking, so I treated them just how I treat our regular customers. I never encountered any military person outside of that job, and I have to admit, I can't tell if sometimes my autism just gives me a pass for folks to either be super sweet or endearing towards me, or they get super frustrated when I had to ask twice or thrice to repeat what they said. Curse my auditory processing disorder. Otherwise, I got burned out fast, and I cried when my coworkers hugged me goodbye because I had fun. But summer brought over more entitled people than I can share. My coworkers and managers were great, but the customers we got were emotionally exhausting. I could just cry. 2. So I worked in a place for almost 5 years, and had this manager that had been there for maybe a year at this point. Now, this lady used to work in a university, so I guess she was used to younger people listening to what she had to say. Mind you, she had a lot of trouble in her personal life at this time, so I think that's what really brought the entitlement out. At this point, I've had like 3 other managers, but they keep leaving, so I pretty much have a new one every year. So we have this huge activity that we have to do every 3 or 4 weeks. And I always had to do basically the worst part of it. You mostly had to stay late past your contracted hours on that day, but whatever. And you'd usually have to finish up lunch early to start. My manager pulls me aside and tells me that I talk too much while we're doing this task, and that it is distracting others and her from the work. I'm pissed about it, but I'm like, whatever. I'll keep my mouth shut so she has nothing to complain about. While we're doing the task, a couple of the guys I worked with start chatting, but I just keep my responses short and don't initiate any conversations. Just put my head down and work like a good corporate slave should do. They could probably tell something was up and kept trying to joke around, but I just kept my reactions to the minimum. Then all of a sudden, something starts making a sound, and glass goes flying everywhere. We all look where it came from, and apparently my manager started heating a piece of equipment for sterilization, but forgot to refill the equipment with water. So the equipment just kept heating and heating until it exploded. This equipment was quite costly, mind you, and we had barely any replacements. So it happened, and we start cleaning it up. All of a sudden, my manager wants to pull me aside. She says we need to have a word in private. I'm confused why, but okay. As soon as we are in the other room, she turns to me and says she made a mistake because I was talking. It's my fault she didn't follow procedure, apparently. At that moment, I was so pissed, because she was really going to attempt to lay the blame on me, so I told her, no, I've barely been talking. I did as you asked, and it's not my fault that you broke the equipment. She can tell that I was angry and said we'll talk about it later in our one-on-one meeting. I can't remember if it was ever brought up again. Well, I remained adamant that I wasn't to blame. Fast forward a few months, she asked me to help her with a task. She makes a mistake, but that's okay, I tell her, because we do actually have a spare. She screws up again and is panicking, when I remind her we have more spares in long-term storage. I then very smugly tell her it's okay, we all make mistakes. And I can see she's had some character growth here, because she did not blame me and was actually appreciative towards me. After that, she was actually a really decent manager, and I was genuinely sad to see her go. 3. Was listening to a Bridezilla story, and it reminded me of something that happened when my lady wife and I were planning our wedding in 1992. Part 1 is background context, and Part 2 is the entitlement. Part 1. The wedding we wanted and had. My lady wife is the anti-Karen, the anti-Bridezilla. On our first date, she found out a stack of restaurant coupons and said, "Where do you want to take me?" We picked Pizza Hut. Her engagement ring is a heart-shaped amethyst with 2 little diamond chips. I bought it at Kmart. She cherishes it. Her wedding dress did not come from a bridal shop, it came from the Sears catalog. It's a very simple white lace straight tea-length dress with cream underdress. Would not be out of place at an afternoon tea. I bought my 3-piece navy pinstripe suit, since I needed a suit anyway. We wore the same clothes, with different accessories, to a costume party as a 1920s gangster and his moll. We had the wedding at our church. Our pastor was the real deal. He blessed the rings, and when he handed them back, they were ice cold. We exchanged the old wedding vows. Think King James Bible style. My lady wife nixed the obey, though. A couple of my buddies found out at the last minute that they could make it and showed up. After we said our vows, they pulled out swords and made an impromptu arch for us to walk under. My wife's friends were upset and started yelling, "Nobody told us to bring our swords!" Yeah, major sci-fi, fantasy, D&D, and medieval geeks on both sides of the aisle. The reception was in the community room at the volunteer fire department I belonged to. Not fancy, but so informal and chill and practically free. A local supermarket with an awesome hot food bar catered. Everyone had so much fun. My boss's boss, a good friend, gorgeous blonde, showed up in her little black dress and appropriately flirted with my buddies. I don't think anybody will forget the pillow mint fight that broke out. A few of my wife's older relatives seemed sort of confused at the antics at first, but ended up having a blast. My father-in-law had set a rough budget for the wedding in his head. My lady wife came in way under that, so he gave us the difference in cash at the reception. He was already paying for the honeymoon as his wedding present to us. Honeymoon was within a day's drive, and was a huge deal for what we got. My lady wife remembers the complete total spent by us and father-in-law as less than $2,000 US in 1992, which included the honeymoon, so under $4,500 today. 32 years together, 31 years married this October. Next anniversary, I'm going to make a page for my granddad and raise a toast to his 5 years of wedded bliss. Part 2. Attempted hijacking. When my lady wife announced our engagement, one of her co-workers, not even a friend apparently, got wedding rabies. She was so happy and went over the top offering to help. My lady wife was doing the tiny amount of wedding planning that was needed. As you heard, as her maid of honor lived in New Jersey, we were in upstate New York, and had 2 kids to look after. Co-worker insisted that it wasn't fair to my wife that the maid of honor wasn't doing the wedding planning. She kept trying to insert herself as the wedding planner. Nice of her to offer. But she wanted to arrange our wedding the way she wanted it. Whiskey Tango Foxtrot? No, we did not want the frou-frou centerpiece thingies or any of that nonsense. Co-worker, not knowing my wife well, of course had zero clue what our tastes are. My wife's maid of honor was already making custom silk flowers for us, and the tables as a wedding present. I think the co-worker was delusional enough to think she could weasel her way into being maid of honor. My wife kept politely but firmly shutting her down. The last straw was when the co-worker called to tell me about the surprise bridal shower she was throwing for my wife so I could get her there. Oh, hell no. First, my wife was already going to have a bridal shower at our house. Father-in-law and I went down to the fire hall and watched baseball. Second, my wife hates surprise parties. Third, my wife would never have picked that restaurant. An overpriced steakhouse is the absolute last restaurant she would ever pick. Fourth, who the heck was the co-worker planning on inviting? She didn't know any of my wife's friends. Wife shut that down hard. She immediately called the co-worker and told her off. No meltdown, no yelling, no screaming. No bad language or insults, just pure anger, as hot and bright as a welder's torch. Cue tears from co-worker. I was just trying to help. Nope, denied. We joke that you need to keep my lady wife away from breakable objects when she's angry. Cities, mountain ranges, that kind of fragile stuff. Drama over, and the wedding happened. 4. My parents have been in their home for 55 years in a residential dead-end street. I was raised in that house and helped them maintain it in the golden years, so they can stay there. As you would expect, most of the homes in the neighborhood have been sold at least once, as retired people downsize and young families move in. 20 or so years ago, a family moved in next door and had young children. Because I am an only child with no kids, my parents embraced the children, and also the family as a whole, Christmas gifts, birthdays, etc. For their trouble, they have been taken advantage of over the years to the point I won't even look at these people. For example, asking my father to pet sit their cat, then leaving no food or litter for the cat, and not answering the phone when he called to ask what to buy, no reimbursement. This happened repeatedly. Telling my father to leave the tomatoes and other veggies he grows on their doorstep, rather than personally come over or even acknowledge. Again, no thank you. Telling my father they will take him to breakfast to thank him for the pet care. They owe him 6 or more breakfasts at this point. Declining to contribute to the maintenance of a shared easement, so my father mowed, seeded, and fertilized it every year, until he was unable to due to his age. So now the landscaping company they pay to maintain the rest of the yard does it on our dime. During COVID, inviting them to their Cape house. My mom has cancer and was unable to go most places during the pandemic, so she was very excited to go. They cancelled because they forgot and never reached out with another invitation. Their daughter got married and my mother was invited to the shower. For the above reason, she did not attend, but got a gift, which she wanted to give the bride in person, but was told they were too busy and to leave it on the doorstep. They attended the wedding, and my mother falls down the stairs leaving, requiring an ambulance, though no one at the wedding is involved and no scene. No one calls to see if she's okay. There's more, but that's enough to give the idea. I've told my parents to set boundaries many times over the years, and they were being taken advantage of, but my folks chose to keep the peace. 2 days ago, the wife calls and tells my mother, from next door, they are selling their house. My mother expresses she will be sad to see them go, but wishes them well, then puts my father on the phone. My father's reaction is a bit different. He starts in on his concerns about a wild card moving in, the shared easement, etc. Please remember, he's 87 years old. Neighbor basically hangs up on him, then calls back and yells at my mom for how insensitive he was, and how they are like family, and she can't believe he would be so rude. The for sale signs went up yesterday at noon. She had literally waited to tell my parents until less than 24 hours before. Yet they're like family. I know there's some truth to the devil you know, but it's a good thing they made the move before I inherited the house, because the gravy train would have crashed and burned on my watch. There would have been a stockade fence down that side of the property within a week. Also, my dad would find a kitty litter box filthy, along with no litter to replace it, and the sink full of dirty dishes when he rinsed the kitty's water bowl. 5. When my grandmother was diagnosed with cancer, she opted for no treatment. She had watched her husband go through chemo, radiation, and surgery, and he was miserable the whole time. She didn't want that for herself. Her family supported her. Over the next year, she gifted items to family and friends, told us to write our names on the things we want, take what we wanted, etc. There were conditions. No, you can't have that. It's the family heirloom meant to go to Aunt and her kids, or to Dad and his kids. We all knew what those items were and who they were going to, so that was easily settled after she died. The house was inherited by my father, who very suddenly and expectedly passed away 2 weeks later. I inherited the house at that point. The next-door neighbor, Todd, came over several times, upset that he and his kids, 21-year-old female and 19 male, weren't invited to Grandma's funeral. There wasn't one. We were all too busy reeling from my father's death. Weren't presented with a copy of the will. It only included family members, and he knew Grandma loved his kids like her own. She didn't. She complained about them coming over all the time, stealing her water to fill their pool, and she had to tell them to stop calling her Grandma. He wanted to know if I would allow his kids to go through the house to see if there was anything they'd like to remember her by. Okay, first dude, my grandma died 4 weeks ago, and dude, my dad died 2 weeks ago. I thought he was awfully rude, but I offered to let them go through the boxes I had packed, and I was planning to donate, and he was offended. I mean, mortified. He said his daughter and son had their hearts set on some items that were family heirlooms, and I literally laughed at him. I explained they were family heirlooms and would be staying with me, and 2 of the items had already gone home with my brother. He said, "My kids were her family, and she would have gifted those to them. They should have been included along with everyone else when everything was divided up." Keep in mind that none of us knew this guy or his kids other than the neighbors next door. They were never at any family gatherings that were held at her house, and the only time I ever heard her talk about them was when she was complaining about them. Especially when she caught them using both her hoses to fill their pool, and then come over complaining because she had put locks on the outdoor faucets. Luckily, Todd's house was in foreclosure, and he moved away about a year later. This happened a little over 10 years ago. We were all prepared for Grandma's passing, and while we were sad, we were also sad about my dad's passing, which was unexpected and absolutely devastating. He was my best friend, and I feel his loss almost daily. I am surprised at how much everyone's condolences mean to me, even after so many years. Thank you. Todd brought up the subject 3 times in the year he lived next door, all within about 2 weeks. This particular incident was the end of it. The first 2 times were eyebrow-raising hints where I walked away, not really sure if I was interpreting his words correctly. This time he was brazenly clear, and when I laughed and told him he couldn't have the items he listed, he never brought it up again. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Idiots in the Wild, episode 127. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Before you go, please do poke the like button. And if you'd like to get the videos a little bit early, then you can support me through Patreon for as little or as much as you like a month. And you can also get yourself some nifty Hellfreezer merchandise, both of which are linked in the description. You can also make donations during streams when I do them, and videos like this one. While this is not required, it is very much appreciated, and thank you kindly. Alright, let's see. No other business today. I had to check my birthday shoutouts. There's a few upcoming, but none right now. So let's move right along to Hellfreezer's question of the day. And today's question is there a museum you've never been to but you would really, really like to? I like waxwork museums. I've been to the one in Edinburgh, it was a very long time ago, but I still love the idea of them. Maybe it's just the idea of replicating people. That sounded more evil than it was meant to. Maybe just evil enough. Anyway, so I'd like to go to Madame Tussauds. Never been, might never go, but it's always going to be in the back of my mind. So what do you think? What are some of yours? Please leave your answers in a comment below. And with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.